My wife secretly sold my family's $500, $0 inheritance to fund her affair with our immigration lawyer, and now she's suing me for half the proceeds. I never suspected she'd turn our life into a courtroom nightmare. I never thought I'd be that guy. The one who finds out his wife's been lying to him for years, cheating behind his back, and somehow manages to turn everything into a courtroom nightmare. But that's exactly what happened. It all started with a gut feeling I couldn't shake, then led to a series of revelations that left me feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My wife and I had been married for about 6 years. We met in college, had a pretty good life together, or so I thought. She always seemed a little bitchy, but I chalked it up to her being stressed with her job as a real estate agent. She was beautiful, ambitious, and honestly a little manipulative, probably why I fell for her in the first place. But she was also the kind of woman who knew how to hide her true colors well, or so I thought. Things started to feel off about a year. Became more distant, less interested in our usual date nights, and she started working late more often. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured her job was demanding. But then she started to cancel plans, made excuses about client meetings or urgent paperwork. I noticed she was acting secretive, her phone always locked, messages deleted, emails cleared out. I didn't want to be that guy who checks her phone, but something in me just couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion. One night I decided to be a little sneaky. I knew her password, I'd seen her type it in a few times, and I unlocked her phone while she was in the shower. That's when I saw it. An email thread with our immigration lawyer, a guy named Mark, discussing her urgent needs and future plans. The emails were explicit enough. They talked about meeting up for sex, and she even mentioned how she was saving up for something special with Mark. I felt my stomach drop. My heart started pounding. I scrolled further and there were photos, flirty, intimate photos of her and Mark taken at some hotel. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I kept staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Been cheating on me with our lawyer? How long has this been going on? And the worst part, she's been lying to my face all this time, pretending everything's fine while she's secretly planning her affair. My mind raced. I felt betrayed, angry, hurt, and completely numb all at once. The next day, I confronted her. I told her I knew about the emails, about the photos, everything. She looked at me with this fake smile, like she was trying to play it off, and said, "You're overreacting. It's not what you think. You're just paranoid." She told me I was imagining things, that Mark was just a friend helping her with immigration paperwork, and that she'd never cheat on me. But I knew the truth. I saw the evidence, plain and simple. Her reaction was infuriating. She called me jealous, insecure, and accused me of spying on her because I didn't trust her. She told me I was being ridiculous, that I was ruining everything over some stupid emails. But I wasn't stupid. I knew this wasn't just about emails or some misinterpreted friendship. She was having sex with Mark, probably for months, maybe longer, and she was lying to me about it all along. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything I saw, trying to understand how my wife could do this to us. The woman I trusted, the woman I loved, was cheating, lying, and now she was trying to gaslight me into doubting myself. I felt a mix of rage and sadness. How could she be so callous? How could she turn my trust into this twisted game? The emotional toll was brutal. I felt betrayed, but also deeply hurt. I kept wondering if I missed the signs, if I was blind to how she was feeling or what she was doing. I felt stupid for not noticing earlier, for not seeing the clues. And yet, I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was not something I could ignore anymore. This was bigger than just a little affair. This was a betrayal of everything we had built together. I started to think about what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her again, demand she come clean, or just walk away, but another part of me knew I had to be strategic, was manipulative and bitchy enough to spin the story in her favor to make me look like the bad guy. I knew I had to gather more evidence, think about my options, and prepare myself for whatever was coming. I can't lie, this whole thing has changed me. I feel like I've been sucker punched, left to pick up the pieces of a life I thought I knew. I'm angry, yes, but I also feel a strange sense of resolve. She thinks she can lie her way out of this, but I'm not going down without a fight. The betrayal cuts deep, but I'm not going to let her destroy me. not without a fight. After I found out about Safair, everything changed. I started noticing even more signs that I hadn't caught before. Her secretive behavior, hurried texts, and the way she'd suddenly get defensive when I asked about her late nights or her phone. But I kept my cool, knowing I needed to be smart. If she was manipulative enough to lie about her feelings, I had to play it carefully. I decided I'd need concrete proof if I wanted to confront her again, or worse, take any legal action later. So I started digging deeper. I hired a private investigator. I know, sounds extreme, but I wasn't about to let her spin her lies without evidence. Within a week, the pie came back with photos and videos, and Mark meeting up at a hotel, sneaking into a room late at night, and even going at it in the back of his car. The images hit me like a freight train. Seeing her with another man, especially someone I trusted, was devastating. It was like my entire world was collapsing. Meanwhile, kept up her act, acting innocent and bitchy as ever. She accused me of being paranoid, say I was jealous, or that I was just insecure because I didn't want her to have a life outside of our marriage. But I knew better. She was lying, and she was lying well. She tell friends she was under so much stress, that I was controlling, or that I'd lost my mind. But I wasn't crazy. I had the evidence. I just needed to figure out what to do with it. I started to prepare myself mentally. I knew I couldn't just walk away without consequences. Was a master at twisting things. She'd turn herself into the victim, accuse me of being jealous or insecure, and try to make the whole thing my fault. That's her style, blame shift and manipulate until she's in control. So I had to be strategic. I started documenting everything. Her lies, her texts, her sneaky meetings. I even set up a hidden camera in our bedroom, just in case she tried to deny anything once I confronted her again. One afternoon, came home from her appointment with her sister. She was in a foul mood, snapping at me over the smallest things. I decided it was time. I sat her down calmly but firmly and showed her the evidence I'd collected. I told her I knew everything about the affair, the emails, the hotel room photos. Her face twisted into a nasty sneer, and she started to lie even more, claiming she was just talking to Mark about her immigration paperwork, that they had no sex, no affair, and that I was crazy for believing such lies. I couldn't take her bullshit anymore. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her she was done. I told her I wasn't going to be played like a fool anymore, that I was done being lied to, manipulated, or made to feel guilty for her cheating. I told her she'd crossed a line and I wasn't going to let her destroy what little dignity I had left. That's when she finally snapped, calling me a jealous psycho, saying I was just paranoid and that I was ruining her life for nothing. But I knew the truth. I knew she'd been lying for months, maybe longer. I told her I'd had enough. I told her I was filing for divorce and that I was going to take her to court to get my fair share of the inheritance she secretly sold off. I found out that she'd sold a large part of our family's inheritance, about $500, $0 worth, to fund her affair with Mark. She used that money to pay for lavish hotel stays, gifts, and who knows what else. My mind reeled. I'd always trusted her, and she'd turned around and sold out everything we'd built just to keep her affair going. The emotional impact hit me hard. I felt sick, betrayed, yes, but also furious. How could she be so selfish, so manipulative? I'd been blind for so long, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. The worst part was knowing she'd probably try to sue me for half the proceeds of the sale, because she's that kind of person. She's already lawyered up, threatening to drag me into a legal battle over the money she stole from us. I felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I was furious at her for destroying everything, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, I saw her for what she really was. I knew I had to fight back, protect what was left of my dignity, and get out of this mess with some semblance of my life intact. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, trust, and the fact that I'd been played for a fool. I've started talking to lawyers, gathering all my evidence, and preparing for the inevitable courtroom battle. It's going to be ugly, and I know she's going to try every trick in the book to turn things around. But I also know I can't let her get away with this. I have to stand up for myself and what's right. Because if I don't, I'll be the one left holding the bag, and I refused to be that guy. The more I dug into lies, the more I realized just how deep her deception went. She was always the bitchy, manipulative type, but this was on a whole new level. While she was busy pretending to be the perfect wife, fussing over the house, throwing tantrums if I didn't do things her way, she was secretly funneling our inheritance into her affair with Mark. I found bank statements, wire transfers, and receipts that proved she sold off chunks of our $500, $0 inheritance without telling me. She used the money to pay for hotel rooms, gifts, and who knows what else to keep Mark happy. I was furious. Not just at her cheating, but at the fact she'd lied so blatantly. All those years I thought we had a solid life, a future. Turns out, she'd been planning her escape, selling out our family's savings, lying about her whereabouts and sneaking around behind my back. And when I finally found out, she had the nerve to act innocent, call me paranoid, and accuse me of controlling her. Yeah, right. The only thing I was controlling was my own life, trying to keep everything together. She was the one controlling the narrative, twisting everything to make herself look like the victim. It was all so sudden, yet it felt like I'd been hit by a ton of bricks. One minute I was a husband who trusted his wife, and the next I was discovering that she'd been betraying me for months, maybe longer. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. The emotional was relentless. I'd go from furious to devastated, then back again. Seeing her with Mark, knowing she'd sold out my trust for money and sex, it was a punch to the gut every single time I thought about it. I knew I had to take control of the situation. I started documenting everything, saving emails, taking screenshots, recording phone calls where legal. I also hired a lawyer. I couldn't handle this alone. My lawyer, Lisa, was sharp, experienced, and understood exactly what I was dealing with. She warned me that would try to spin the story, paint herself as the victim, and maybe even try to sue me for half the proceeds of the sale of our inheritance. That's her typical move: lie, deny, accuse. But I had enough evidence to prove she'd been lying about her whereabouts and that she'd secretly sold assets without my knowledge. Meanwhile, kept up her bitchy facade, throwing tantrums whenever I brought up the evidence. She'd call me crazy, accuse me of stalking, and say I was jealous because she was so stressed out. She even had the nerve to tell mutual friends that I was paranoid and controlling, trying to paint herself as the victim. I couldn't believe her audacity. She was the one cheating, lying, and selling our family's assets behind my back. Yet she had the nerve to act like I was the problem. One night, I decided I'd had enough of her lies. I confronted her again, this time with my lawyer on speakerphone. I told her I knew about the sale of the inheritance, about her affair with Mark, and that I was done playing her game. She snapped, calling me a jealous psycho, crazy, and dangerous. She accused me of trying to ruin her life because I was possessive and insecure. I just looked at her and said, "You've been lying to me for months. You've been sleeping with Mark, selling our assets, and trying to manipulate everyone around you. I'm not going to let you do this anymore." That was the turning point. I decided to file for divorce. I told her I was taking control of the situation and I was going to fight for my rights. I knew she'd try to fight back, maybe even try to sue me for half the proceeds, claiming I was trying to steal her share of the inheritance. But I had the evidence and I was prepared. Had already spent a lot of the money. She bought herself a fancy apartment downtown, paid off her credit cards, and even bought Mark a brand new car. She'd been living high on the hog, all funded by the sale of our family's money. The emotional toll was overwhelming. I felt betrayed, angry, and exhausted. But at the same time, I knew I had to stay strong. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into feeling guilty or ashamed. I had to protect what was mine, my dignity, my money, and my future. I realized that she was not just a cheater but a thief, a liar, and someone who didn't care about the vows she took. All she cared about was herself, her affair, and her greed. I started moving forward with legal action. I contacted forensic accountants to trace where the money had gone. I prepared my case, gathering all the evidence of her deception. I knew would try every trick in the book. She'd lie, accuse me of abuse, or even try to claim I was mentally unstable. But I was ready. I had to be. I couldn't let her get away with destroying everything we built together. I owed it to myself to fight and get justice. The hardest part was the emotional aftermath. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs, how I let her get away with so much. But I also knew I had to focus on moving forward. I couldn't fix what was broken, but I could make sure she paid for what she did. I was done being the victim. Now it was about fighting back, reclaiming my life, and making sure she didn't get away with her lies and betrayal. I had to be strong for myself and for whatever future I had left. The court dates kept getting closer, and with each passing week, the reality of what had done started to sink in even deeper. I'd never thought I'd be the guy sitting in a courtroom, fighting my wife over a stolen inheritance and her affair with Mark. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's nightmare. But I had no choice. The evidence was solid, and I was determined to see this through. Of course, was still playing her manipulative games. She'd show up at court, bitchy and dismissive, trying to undermine my case with her typical lies. She told everyone, her friends, her family, even some of mine, that I was the one who was obsessively spying on her, that I was jealous and controlling. She'd cry crocodile tears about how heartbroken she was, how I was ruining her reputation, and how she was just trying to start fresh after everything. But I knew better. I knew her game. She was the one who'd betrayed everything we had, and now she was trying to spin it as if I was the villain. Meanwhile, I was pouring my energy into the legal process. I hired forensic accountants to trace the money she'd stolen from our inheritance. They uncovered wire transfers to Mark, payments for hotel stays, and even some off-the-books expenses that tried to hide. It was a mess, but I was finally getting a clear picture of just how much she'd taken and what she'd done with it. It was enough to prove she'd been embezzling from us, selling off assets without my knowledge and funneling the cash into her affair. The emotional toll was brutal. I'd go from feeling angry to feeling numb, then back again. Every time I saw her bitchy face in court, I felt a mix of disgust and sadness. How could she be so callous, so selfish? I trusted her, loved her, and she turned around and sold out everything we had, our savings, our future, our marriage. It was like she was trying to erase me, erase us, and start fresh with Mark and her stolen money. Yet I refused to let her win. I kept telling myself I was fighting for what was right, for justice. I'd never imagined my life turning into this kind of mess, but here I was, trying to hold on to whatever dignity I had left. I prepared my testimony carefully, practicing what I'd say, making sure I had all the evidence organized. I knew would try to undermine me, lie, or even accuse me of abuse or some other bullshit. That's her style: gaslight, lie, manipulate. But I was ready. One thing that struck me during this process was how much of her lies she was already trying to spin outside of court. She'd tell her friends I was crazy, that I was possessive, and that I was trying to control her. She painted herself as the victim, yet all I had to do was show the court her emails, her bank statements, the photos of her with Mark. That evidence was irrefutable. It was clear she'd been unfaithful and dishonest, and her attempts to manipulate the narrative only made her look worse. I also started to realize how much I'd been holding onto hope that she'd change, that she'd come clean and admit everything. But that hope faded fast. Was a master at twisting things to her advantage, and I knew now that I couldn't count on her honesty. The only way forward was to confront her with what I knew and let the courts decide. I had to let go of the idea that she'd suddenly become truthful. That ship had sailed the moment I found those emails. Throughout this process, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. I wasn't just fighting for money or justice. I was fighting to regain my self-respect. Betrayal had cut deep, and the emotional scars weren't going away overnight. But I knew I had to stay strong for myself and for what was right. I refused to let her manipulate me into feeling guilty or ashamed for exposing her. That's what she wanted: control, power, but I was taking that back. The day of the hearing finally arrived. I felt nervous but also oddly relieved. All the evidence was laid out, my testimony was prepared, and I knew I'd done everything I could. As I sat in the courtroom, I looked at sitting across from me, her bitchy, sneering face trying to look innocent. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she'd ruined everything, but I kept my composure. This wasn't just about her cheating. It was about her stealing from us, betraying everything we'd built. And I was going to make sure the truth came out no matter what. When the judge finally announced the verdict, I felt a strange sense of closure. The court ordered to pay back the stolen inheritance, and she was also ordered to pay damages for the emotional distress she caused. She looked furious, but I couldn't bring myself to feel victorious. It was just relief, relief that I'd fought for what was right and that I'd finally exposed her lies. Now I'm left to pick up the pieces. The marriage is over and I'm starting to rebuild my life. It's not easy, and I'm still angry at how everything played out, but I know I'm stronger for having faced the truth. Manipulation and betrayal taught me a harsh lesson about trust, greed, and deception. I've learned that sometimes you have to fight for yourself, no matter how bitchy or manipulative the other person is. And I want anyone reading this to know, don't ignore the signs. If something feels wrong, trust yourself. Because if you don't, you might end up losing everything, just like I almost did. After the court case wrapped up, I thought I'd finally get some peace. The legal battle was draining, but at least I had clarity. Was ordered to pay back the stolen inheritance, and the judge made it clear her lies and betrayal wouldn't go unpunished. Still, I knew that the damage was done, trust was shattered, and the emotional scars ran deep. I felt exhausted, like I'd been run over by a truck, but also oddly relieved that the nightmare was coming to an end. But here's the thing. Life doesn't just go back to normal after something like this. Of course, didn't take the court ruling well. She threw a fit, calling me all sorts of names, crazy, possessive, controlling, and accused me of trying to ruin her life. She even tried to spin her actions as self-protection, claiming I was abusive or manipulative. That's her usual tactic: lie, deny, and blame shift until she's the victim. But I had the evidence, and I refused to be manipulated anymore. The aftermath was messy. Moved out of the house, taking a good chunk of her clothes and some of her more expensive jewelry. She kept insisting she'd start over, but I knew better. She was angry, bitter, and desperate to save face. She even threatened to sue me for half the proceeds from the sale of the inheritance, claiming she was entitled to her share, even though she'd secretly sold assets without my knowledge. I knew she'd keep fighting, keep trying to manipulate the system, and I had to stay prepared. I started focusing on rebuilding my life. I cut contact with completely, no more texts, no more calls. I made sure to block her on social media, and I hired a new lawyer to handle any future legal issues she might try to throw my way. I also took some time off work to process everything. Honestly, I felt numb most days, but I knew I had to keep going. I realized I'd been giving her too much power for too long, and now was the time to take control back. Financially, I was left picking up the pieces. The inheritance she sold was meant to secure our future: college funds for the kids, a down payment on a house, savings for emergencies. Instead, she used it all to fund her affair and buy herself a new lifestyle. I filed a suit to recover the stolen money and to hold her accountable. My lawyer told me the chances were good. She'd already spent most of the cash, but the court could order her to pay restitution, and that was enough to make me feel like I was fighting for something. Emotionally, I was a wreck. I kept replaying everything: the lies, the betrayal, the way she manipulated everyone around her. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. Anger at her for destroying what we had, sadness for the years lost, and relief that I was finally free from her grip. I also started therapy to deal with the emotional fallout. It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't let her ruin me completely. As I moved forward, I also realized I had to forgive myself. I kept thinking about what I could have done differently, whether I missed the signs or if I was just. But I understood now that sometimes people hide their true selves very well. Was a master manipulator, and I was just blind to it. Forgiving myself was part of healing. I had to accept that I'd done my best, and sometimes that's all you can do. Today, I'm still healing but slowly rebuilding my life. I've started dating again cautiously, and I'm focusing on my career and my kids. I don't trust easily anymore, but I've learned to listen to that little voice inside that warns me when something's wrong. I want to warn anyone out there. If you notice your partner acting secretive, manipulative, or lying about money, don't ignore it. Because if you do, you might end up in a situation worse than mine, losing everything you thought was yours. Looking back, I can say I learned some hard lessons about trust, betrayal, and resilience. Betrayal taught me not to take anything for granted and to be vigilant. I also learned that justice might take time, but it's worth fighting for. I can't change what she did, but I can control how I respond. And I choose to move forward, stronger, wiser, and more cautious than before. If there's one thing I want others to take away from my story, it's this. Never ignore the red flags and never let someone manipulate your trust. Because once it's gone, it's damn hard to get back. Now, I focus on rebuilding my life and making sure I never get caught off guard again. I still have scars, sure, but I'm healing. And I know that someday I'll look back at this chapter and see it as a painful but necessary lesson. Because sometimes the only way to truly move on is to face the truth head on, no matter how ugly it might be. It's been months since that courtroom day, and I can honestly say I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. The initial shock and devastation have given way to a strange kind of relief. I never thought I'd get to this point, standing here, knowing I fought for what was right and that I managed to reclaim some shred of dignity in the process. But it's true. I've learned a lot through this nightmare, and if there's one thing I want anyone reading this to understand, it's this. Trust is fragile, and when it's broken, it's damn hard to repair. But you can survive it. You can come out stronger. Looking back, I realize how much I was blind, how much I ignored the signs because I wanted to believe in the best of her. I thought we had a good life, that she loved me. Turns out, she was just good at hiding her true self, using her bitchy, manipulative attitude to keep me off balance. The affair, the lies, the theft, all part of her effort to escape, to live a life she wanted without considering how it would destroy us. I've come to accept that I was a victim of her greed and deception, but I refuse to let her win completely. The financial damage was significant, but the emotional scars are healing. I've learned to trust my instincts more, to listen to that little voice that warns me when something's not right. I've also learned that sometimes the only way to get closure is to face the ugly truth head on. The kids are doing okay. I've made sure they understand that their mother's actions weren't about them. She was just caught up in her own selfishness. I've promised myself I won't let her betrayal define my future. I'm slowly rebuilding, focusing on my career, my health, and my happiness. I've started dating again, cautiously, and I'm learning that not everyone is like. There are still good people out there who value honesty and integrity. The hardest part was forgiving myself for not seeing the signs sooner. But I've come to realize that sometimes people are very good at hiding who they really are. I can't blame myself for trusting her, but I can use this experience as a lesson. Never ignore red flags and always protect what's yours, your money, your heart, your peace of mind. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone in a similar situation, it's this. Don't stay silent. Speak up, gather evidence, and stand your ground. The truth may be painful, but it's necessary. It's the only way to truly move on and rebuild your life. And trust me, you will survive. You might feel broken now, but eventually you'll find your footing again. So here I am, finally at peace. I can look in the mirror and know I did everything I could. I fought for my dignity, my future, and my sanity. And even though the scars of betrayal will always be part of me, they've also made me stronger. I've learned that resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do. Life goes on, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. I've faced the worst, and I've come out the other side. That's what matters. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing is to remember your worth. No matter how bitchy, manipulative, or sneaky someone tries to be, they don't get to define your value. You do. And I do. And I know now that I'm stronger than any betrayal, any lie, or any scheme she threw at me. I survived, I learned, and I moved on.